So thanks for having me here tonight. I thought I'd start with a joke, loosen it up. So there's one thing you can take away tonight. There's two types of marketing analysts. One, those who can extrapolate from the data. Okay, that went over like a ton of lead bricks. Caesar thought it might. And two is those who can't. So I'm glad. I think I have the right presentation for you guys tonight. And let me just get into my my computer. What do you call 100 statisticians at a tea party? A Z party. All right, so not too many data scientists in here tonight either. I think I definitely have the right presentation then. Whoops. I've got to airplay this, and we're going to go. All right. So I titled this presentation, which I custom built for Vishal, "The CMO Isn't Satisfied, Improving Marketing Analytics." And I was wondering, what do I say to these people? Because I don't know who's going to come. I don't know what level. Are they CEOs like Bill with PhDs or Rama? MIT professors? Are they analysts just coming into the field? Are they practitioners like myself? Are they academics who just want to learn more? So as I was wondering, I found out about the CMO Council's recent survey called the CMO Study. And I read it, and I thought to myself, my goodness, we have a problem in marketing analytics. At least practitioners, and I would probably say vendors also have a problem, because the perception of the return on investment, the perception of the helpfulness of marketing analytics is not good. And it appears, even though we're all interested in it, CMO's not happy. So I wanted to quickly begin this presentation with some data. It's true to my analytics background. I look at some data, some simple histograms. And basically what this is saying is that only 1/3 of the business impact that marketers do is quantifiable. Let's forget about, 50% is wasted, or they don't know. Is it better if I speak into the microphone? All right, so I'll have to do this. I'm used to level A. So only 1/3 is quantifiable. 2/3 isn't quantifiable. And I thought to myself, well, that's not good, because what does a marketing analyst do if not quantify? Qualify to some degree, but quantify. Yet there's going to be a 72% increase, right, in budget of analytics, in analytics technology, while the time series in the last year or so, couple of years, is a decreasing percentage of products that are even making use of analytics when it's available. And so this is a huge problem, I think, though it's also an opportunity, right? And there's been a decreasing perception in the overall importance over those same 2 years. And if people had to rank it, look at this ranking. More than 50% rank it below average. And 50% don't believe they have the right talent. 60% have trouble finding talent. So I thought to myself, if these are the salient, these are the key takeaways of this study to me, something needs to be done. And what can a practitioner do? I thought there's a lot of things a practitioner can do. Is sort of help solve for this problem. We look, 15% of all ROI is just kind of guessed. Bill's in his office, pinning the tail on the donkey. Rama's in his office, making a judgment 27% of the time. Some people do customer surveys. It's bias, right? Some people do econometric modeling. Some people do controlled experimentation. 2%, just 2%, track it from lead gen to sales, right, to cash. Yet, about 3.5%, it looks like, you can see the interval there, of marketing budgets are dedicated to just analytics. So let's just summarize. Only 1/3 of the business impact is quantifiable. There's going to be an increase in budget. There's a decreasing trend in usage, and there's an overall poor perception of the talent, the contribution. And there's a bias towards using judgment. Gut. This is not a good sign. It's all bad. Meanwhile, there's all this cool stuff going on that demands analytics that is truly what I think the CMO is about. Kind of grounding this stuff into the quantifiable and making it financially profitable. And so, I look through what's going on today, what's really interesting. There's some conceptual things going on, this concept of omni-channel, and I'm going to talk about this later in the presentation. So these seamless experiences around brands and about customers. There's a lot going on with privacy and security. We all know about Snowden and the NSA and the White House Privacy Council. Recently, at South by Southwest, a lot of CMOs were concerned about how are we going to maintain the privacy of our customer records that are housed both internally and externally. What security can we put around, especially for big data, right? Where we're bringing together data sets, especially in healthcare, insurance, that are personally identifiable information, that are subject to rules and regulations. And then there's this sort of physical activity, this stuff going on, right? This surging importance of mobile, especially in certain sectors like e-commerce, where the growth is year-over-year could be 100% for certain businesses, yet you see the mobile channel monetizing in terms of conversion at a much lower rate than a site. So the CMO might be concerned about that, right? If we drive the same demand, lower contribution, business is going to suffer. So how do you kind of make up for that? And then there's this part of omni-channel, a device-agnostic customer experiences, kiosks, for example, in store. And then we have the intellectual. A few years ago, I used to host this conference at OMA called OMA Metrics. And I sort of surveyed the room. It was in New York, it was about 500 people. And there were like 3 data scientists. There's a lot more than 3 data scientist job advertisements now. So there's a new sort of a concept in town that's really not that new. That's right. Old boss, same as the new boss, same as the old boss. And then predictive analytics, right? Giving the book away, Dr. Siegel's book. And so all of this unhappiness with analytics is occurring around some really cool stuff that demands measurement. And so I thought, right, how do we solve for these things? How do we make the not quantified quantified? How do we improve analytics usage and its perception for just in the organization? And how do we really staff and how do we build analytics teams that can succeed, whether you're in a brand or you're in product or you're in an agency? And then how do we solve, what do we do as analysts or as people concerned about marketing analytics about these trends? So first, you have to make the not quantified quantified. There are ways to do this, right? First of it, I think, is people to really understand when analytics can help and when it can help. Because I feel like it's viewed as a panacea, right? It's viewed as this curative for like all problems, right? It's big data in the cloud. It's data science. It's going to solve everything. And there's a lot of things it can solve for, and there's a lot of times that it's useful, and there's some times when it's not. So let's take a look at when is the right time. Obviously, when you have data, I can't narrate the number of times in my experience where people have wanted to quantify things where there are no data. And that maybe to create that data, it takes some effort, right? You need some information in the data. Web analytics tools are insufferable for this. They collect so much data, and a lot of it is just a total waste. You don't look at it, it's just noise. But some of it is useful, right, because there's information in it. There's consistency and control. One of the fundamental things analytics does is fundamentally allow for the transparency in operations and in performance, right? And that enables control structures around things, whether it's simply setting benchmarks and trying to hit those benchmarks or setting goals. When there's in highly cross-functional, highly matrixed organizations where analytics is important to the bottom line, let's say an e-tailer, right? Conversion rate is going to be something that most people in the business are going to care highly about, and they're all going to have their opinion about what's the best way to maximize conversion rate. Is it merchandising? Is it better media mix? Is it lifestyle marketing? So when you have a lot of cooks, data can sort of help to distill whether an event might be a better use of a marketing dollar or maybe spending it on inventory. When a company's cross-functional, I mean, you have the same thing, right? Many cooks. And there's times when, you just can't improve the situation with data, and I think that relates to that pie chart we saw before, 42% gut. It's not quantifiable. There's just points where you can't improve a situation with data, and there's some that you can, right? And I'm going to talk a little later in this presentation about how you figure that out. And then the key for me, and what really gets me moving, is when revenue is at risk. Because ultimately, all of the big data and the data science and the predictive analytics, digital analytics, it is all overhead, unless it generates revenue, right? Profitable revenue. So when a business can be helped by analytics, when revenue's at risk, it's key. A lot of times when we have the wrong data, right, we just can't use it. It might not be the granularity we need. We haven't defined why a site exists, right? Have you ever been in this situation, like, why does the site exist? Why is the campaign occurring? It's brand, it's direct response, it's conversion. There can be an absence of business goals. Questions haven't been framed properly, they're not focused. It can often take too long to get the data. One may want to quickly model something for a seasonal event, right? But the model could take a month to do. You can have problems with support, and there can be no ability to take action on the data. There's this myth of actionability, that data inherently is actionable unto itself. In automated systems, certainly, right? But data doesn't really do anything without somebody actually using it or applying it. And sometimes you have no ability to do that. So I've built organizations for several years now, and I kind of look at these things called the P's of analytics. I ripped this right out of Philip Kotler's marketing management book because I thought it would be clever. And so the P's are these things. You need people, right? In order to do any of this, there's an acute insufficiency of people. And those are the people that do lots of different roles, from the analysts, right, to the managers or the directors, to the VPs, who essentially ensure that there's a value chain that's followed that creates economic value. And I'm going to go into that. Pre-engagement is an idea that I elaborate on, meaning that you go out and you actively seek business questions when you're trying to do analysis, and you write them down. And I go over this in my first book pretty elaborately on what a pre-engagement plan might look like. And what this does is it locks things in stone. So what will often happen is this analytics projects will go on. You'll get these, what about this, or what else, or how about this, or did we consider these questions? And looking back as to when you do and do not use data, those may not be the questions you can answer, that you plan to answer. So having like a pre-engagement with all your stakeholders to identify what your analytics plan is going to look like is pretty crucial. And so this begins like a thesis that I have in analytics, that it's definitely a critical technical activity, but it's also a human and social activity. So you have a platform, right? You have process, right? How many of you have in your analytics teams documented processes, like how you deploy a campaign tag, or how you bring aboard a new vendor partner who's sending data? There's production, which is just simply the production of the analysis. The pronouncement, which is actually reaching out to folks to understand, to explain the analysis. You put it in terms of predictions, and ultimately leads to profit. I go over something called the analytics value chain, which again is at a level above the actual work. It's more conceptual, but I think it's helpful to understand what actually an analytics team is doing. First of all, you have to begin with business questions and business requirements. Then you go into a state of data collection, right? Does the data exist? How long will it take to collect it? How can you verify that it's accurate? And then how do you govern that data? Data governance, fairly formal activity in more regulatory environments like finance and healthcare, and something that companies that want to do more than hobbyists, be more than hobbyists with analytics, are serious about. Data governance relates to defining data and making sure that it's consistent, that people in the business understand what a data definition is, people operationally who work with that data understand it, and the technologists understand it. Then you must analyze, communicate, and socialize data. How is that done? Are there weekly meetings? Are there newsletters that go out? Are there virtual ways to collaborate? Are there open office hours? Right? These are all important things to actually creating value with analytics. And then how are you building out optimization and prediction, which are oftentimes overlapped, and I'll talk a bit about them, but are different analytic activities in themselves. And then how do you demonstrate economic value? What do you do every quarter to prove that the analytics team has actually done anything and actually made the business any money or actually had an impact? I'm fairly formal and wrote about some ideas around how one can quantify the unquantifiable in that sense. And I think it's helpful also to put metrics in the context of some life cycle. And I wrote a fairly elaborate chapter on something called the Unified Customer Analytics Life Cycle. And I'm not going to walk you through the whole thing because it might put you guys to sleep, right? But you have to put metrics into a life cycle that allows you to understand how the economic value is generated, right? So you're managing this value chain against a life cycle. And this is the idea of activation. Like, you need something, right? You have to go buy lunch, you need to repair your car. There's exposure, right? Could be through an advertisement, could be through word of mouth. There's things like awareness, right? Being aware that something exists or something that doesn't exist. How is differentiation, right? You like BMW versus Mercedes, or you like Toyota versus Honda. There's a process of consideration that all buyers go through, where marketing tends to touch these first 5 areas of the life cycle as in voice of customer and market research. And there's been a consistent theme in the work that I've done over the last few years to bring together market research with behavioral data. And I go through a quick scenario on how one does that and some metrics around it a little later. Then there's something like conversion, which is pretty well known. I mean, at this point, I think everybody in here would have a definition of conversion. And then there's things like retention and loyalty that a lot of these trends are now starting to play to, right? Mobile as a way to retain and make your customers more loyal. Things like personalization and targeting, right, to create loyalty and create retention. So what does an analytics team do on a day-to-day basis? What are the things they're thinking about? They're trying to move from insight to action. Top 2 rows are from a book from Tom Davenport, and the bottom is something I added in collaboration with him. And essentially, all the activities of an analytics team are summarized here, whether they're looking at the past, the present, or the future, whether they're trying to move from data mining and reporting to something like ongoing optimization or behavioral detection and personalization. And here's an example of what I'm talking about, right? Because now we have to start talking about the conceptual. This is an example of a very dense slide that a lot of you will read. But essentially what this does is it identifies through analysis, taking research data, sampling, prorating it, and understanding whether it would be better to spend a media dollar for a given return on emphasizing secondary use or primary use of a particular product. And that's an example of, a typical day in an analytics team's life. And I talked a bit about what you can achieve when I sort of go out with a little deck and try to prove my worth and existence at these companies. I sort of say, here's what you can achieve with analytics. You can improve revenue, reduce costs, maximize efficiency, enhance the customer experience, grow the business, and to fail more quickly. And I think these things ring salient in the executive suite as opposed to optimize the site, right? Improve revenue, reduce costs are ultimately the 2 pinnacles. So if you can, begin to conceptually think about how you do analytics, right? What is it that the team does and how does it create value? You can start to make the unquantifiable or the quantified quantified. So in improved analytics, one of the first things I talked about in the value chain was actually defining the business questions. We're going to talk a bit about that. And then reports, dashboarding, and self-service. I'm really surprised that I've talked with a few companies recently, and they have really poor reporting and no dashboards. And this is stuff that, 8 years ago, right, we were talking about. And you would just think people would have this stuff, but they don't. And so I want to talk about that in the context of self-service, and then talk about some of the cooler stuff that's a little more buzzy. Analytics answers business questions. So when I talk about like business questions, right, these are examples of business questions that I have received from people. I've anonymized them outside of the company, but just take a look. Like, are these the questions you would expect analytics to answer? Do you have a team that could answer these, right? So reporting and dashboarding. I just have these 2 golden rules, and I tell these to everybody. And so I'm going to tell them to you guys tonight, right? If the data does not meet expectations, it will be asked about and challenged. Like, just a given. And if the data does not meet commonly held beliefs, it will be challenged. So keep in mind that an analytics team, like a practitioner like myself, is pretty much consistently on the hook for making sure that this stuff is right, and that if it does not do these things, that I can justify why. I've spent an inordinate amount of time in my career like stepping through systems and looking at data collection in different ways to find out that we were correct, and it just didn't say what people wanted it to say. And this may go to the reason why 42% of ROI is gut or judgment. But then there's ad hoc and sustaining reporting. Have you guys thought about ad hoc and sustaining reporting? This is a very like analytical, tactical thing, but I think it's important because it's why things don't get done in analytics, right? There are sustaining projects in analytics that may be related to a roadmap or a scrum or the way a team develops. And those have been documented and committed to. And then there's these things that other people want that, to my point about when is it improper to use analytics when it takes too long, that people want ad hoc. And there can often be this confusion around what the analytics team is doing because it is not delineated clearly what is sustaining work to just keep the machine alive, right, to keep people fed, versus what can be done. And so I encourage anyone who's in analytics that one needs to determine whether something's ad hoc and sustained, and if it becomes repeatedly ad hoc, it becomes a sustaining report. Otherwise, you say no to it, and there's a whole art to saying no. And then you start to, as an analyst, think about reporting and dashboarding, right? And like, it's so tactical, reporting and dashboarding. But I've seen like the reports that probably, certainly a few of you have, and we could all do better. And dashboards, there's companies that are just getting funded to create dashboards, and they have valuations of $1 billion, right? And they're pretty cool. So let's look at reporting, right? It's a centralized artifact. It's custom built, right? It allows stakeholders to anchor onto a piece of physical evidence, right? So you actually have something that you can hang your hat on from analytics. It's an enabler of conversation. It's often tracking performance over time. Staff-defined reports, right? It's something that like just happens. And going back to business questions, why can some reports not happen? Because the questions were never asked, data was never collected and governed and verified, and never made it to a report. And I like to joke around a little bit. So I have this thing called roster reporting, which basically is a way to consider reporting. So that means it has to be relevant. It actually be actionable and answering accurately questions. It has to be structured. Anyone want to guess what the T is? What's that? Timely. That's actually right. I pulled that from someone else. And then A, want to guess on that one? It has to be awesome. Honestly, it has to be awesome. Or else, because reports are useless, literally. People don't look at them. They get sent in mailboxes. They die in systems. There's huge loads of them. And then we look at dashboards. Dashboards, they're very different, right? They're usually defined by management. They're meant to distill. There's obviously going to be fewer dashboards than reports. Dashboards often link into those reports. They're visually driven, right? And I talk about this idea of lives dashboarding, which is linked, iterative, verified, echeloned, and strategic. And so these are things that I talk about that are helpful for getting your reporting in line. Here's an example of a dashboard that I thought wasn't bad, and it's been fairly well anonymized. And it goes over Things that I think are helpful, right? First of all, dashboard's got some human touch to it, right? What worked, what didn't work. It's got some highlights, recommendations. I talk about the unified customer analytics lifecycle. There's lots of life cycles. Here's another life cycle that identifies some of them and some metrics related and ties it all back to ROI and actually uses a little nifty thermometer, right, that gives you a progress on year to date. So there's a dashboard. Let's talk a little bit about optimization and prediction, how we can sort of solve for some of these. A quick show of hands. How many people here do optimization or prediction one way or the other? All right, so it's still, that's cool. So there's not that many. So optimization and prediction, two different things, though, you know, they may be part of the same value chain, meaning you may predict something to optimize. In predicting, you may actually improve something. The most typical type of optimization activity you hear about is A/B testing, not to be confused with multivariate testing. Here's an example I stole from Adobe. And quite simply for Baby Center, right, what they wanted to do was test landing pages. That's a very common type of optimization, which essentially when you click from an advertisement or a paid search link or any, you know, inbound campaign, you land on a page that you hope compels somebody to make the next click. And so there's a whole you know, art and science around a landing page optimization. And the results can be astounding. Oftentimes 2 or 3x improvement in action to the next page. Prediction is a bit different. You know, prediction is where data science and models can start to come in to compare performance of a model against another type of analytical activity like segmentation. It's both 100%, it should have percent on both axes. And that line is like just random. Like if you did nothing, that's what you could expect. And so why is prediction so hot? Because there's this idea that if done right, and if it's taken in the right inputs, that the lift from predictive models can be better than actually guessing from segmentation. Targeting and automation. So there's lots of different types of targeting. Most commonly behavioral and contextual targeting that you'll see, but there's targeting, you know, it's simple targeting based on geography, targeting based on intent. There's a company I advise in New York called YieldBot that has an interesting data model that collects data from a lot of sources and clickstream and uses it to predict intent, click through and serve an ad, like an interstitial. And there's this idea that, you know, when you target, you can put that activity into some sort of automated system. And there's a bunch of companies in this area, and I won't drop any names that do marketing automation, but the idea is simply that you're using analytics to build targeted lists based on types of segmentations, whether they're demographic or psychographic or financial. You're executing campaigns across different channels. You're measuring, right, that behavior when it comes through to conversion. You continue to segment based on activity. You score leads, or you score. Rama has an interesting company that scores a lot of different things, and it's pretty cool. And then you might export to your CRM system and sell, analyze the performance, so on, and automate this. So when we look at the solving for the next problem, how can you organize for analytic success? And I think this is why there's maybe 50% of CMOs that do not think the talent is hot and who don't think they're getting any value out of it. Because there's a lot that goes into actually making an analytics team function and work. And oftentimes, analytics can be thought of after the fact, after features and flows, and therefore maybe not subject to the same criticality that other teams are given in terms of resources and investment. So I want to talk about what are the fundamental criteria of an analyst, what does an organization framework look like, and what can be delivered. There we go. So what does it take for the team to work? In order to accomplish, the creation of value with analytics, you can't just have reports that are sent out, and you can't just have systems that hold data that you expect people to interact with, right? There needs to be those tools available, and those tools need to be self-service and integrated with multiple data sets, and they need to be high quality and appropriately granular, right? But you need people, right, who are helping you out. The second one, you have to pardon me, I pulled this slide from a previous presentation, and I didn't pull out that bullet, but it essentially talks about how, you know, for analytics, just like social media, you use data to frame decisions, and so you need to have a company that believes in actually wanting to do that. Many companies have come to me and sort of said, we want to create analytics teams. And I say, well, what are the investments you have? You know, how many? Well, we think we're going to pull this person from here. You know, it doesn't have any staff, or so on and so forth. The company wants to do something, but they don't really believe in doing it. You need executives who can form the governance. You need to set goals. You need to get those people. And I think technology is critical, but it's not as necessary as important. I'm an advocate of centralized analytics organizations, meaning they report into one, you know, line of business, if you will. Oftentimes it's marketing. I think another helpful home is finance. The folks in finance are inherently quantitative, and they understand data, and they use a lot of the similar techniques and approaches that an analytics team uses, and so the language and the vocabulary tends to be not unfamiliar, and there's a nice crossover when you're actually taking marketing analytics and you can understand profitability or marginal ROAS and things like that. There's consultative, you just get people per hire, which I've been doing. Stovepiped, got analysts and they occasionally work together. Hub and spoke, centers of excellence. This is a model that people advocate for. Ernst & Young, right, has a digital analytics advisory service, right, within an accounting and a tax agency. You have decentralized, it's a pretty common. Analysts all over the place, no standard queries, no canonical queries, no data warehousing, you know, no aggregations that are consistent. It can be a mess. And then you have federated, guideline by program managers, meaning you do analytics for a particular product. We're going to do enhanced analytics at Monster, so that's what you're going to do, right? What does a team look like? I've often organized pretty simply. After key, tech people, followed by the technology. I think of three things. You need an architecture team. These are the teams that do database architecture, they're DBAs, they're data modelers, they're responsible for data collection, data warehousing, ETL, things like that. Tagging, tag management, systems configuration, dealing with IT and the software development lifecycle. This is a critical and necessary component of an analytics team. It's even important in SaaS environments, right? Or where you're exporting to things like Redshift. Then there's the reporting team, right? There has to be people who make pizza. And there are people who just make reports all day. I've managed teams like this, and that's all they do, make pizza. You want anchovies on that? Conversion rate on that? All right. And these are the folks who literally just create reports. This becomes more important in globally distributed and highly matrix companies that are trying to satisfy that ad hoc reporting requirement. They need reports. And then you have analysis teams, and these are the folks that get out, socialize, and may or may not, right, have deep technical and data science skills. Some of them do, some of them don't. I had a gentleman used to work for me. He's a Python programmer, used to do some pretty cool text mining. That's all he wanted to do. He did not want to talk to anybody in the business, so it was cool. We understood what he did, and the analyst team took the output, put it into the context of the business question and the answer, and went out and socialized what he did. And the end result of a team that looks like this is you can guide strategic and tactical decisions, right? You can help inform the brand. You can create economic value and profitable revenue, reduce cost. Not to just harp on marketing, I know it's marketing analytics, but there's a lot of things that analytics can serve. And I attempted to just draw some lines around what may be work requested of an analytics team across many functions. This would include simple things like sales collateral. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked just to provide something, you know, goes to the street, got to validate it. Ad and media plan optimization. Tag management on the IT side, right? These are all things that analysts get involved in. And it's interesting because right now, the bulk of the work, it seems that people believe will create economic value is in taking data sets, bringing them together, modeling them like with EDA or something, and then putting some science on top of it, right? And predicting something, okay, fair enough. But there's a lot of other ways that analytics can help a brand, agency can serve their clients with, a consultant can help to do. So we saw for number 4, like trends. What are these trends? And I want to talk a bit about trends. And I tried to bring in personalization so Rama would have some stuff to talk about. You're welcome. And mobile analytics. I think Brian Sudoff might be in the audience from Raj and Disclaimers. I was a former advisor for Localist for a while, but I'm a big fan of mobile analytics, and I've been doing it for quite a long time. And it's you know, is it the year of mobile? Is it an emerging channel? Well, there's challenges to measuring it. You know, devices, cookies, stitching together sessions, using APIs, network and carrier issues. Things that actually happen out in the pipe that you don't even know about, that can't even be detected on the device, cause problems for mobile experiences. So one needs to find, just very similarly to analytics, what are your goals for mobile? And do you have an analytic strategy for mobile? Is it an app? Is it the site? Is it responsive design? You know, it's pretty interesting. And then how do you market and measure that marketing on mobile? A while back, I used this company called Urban Airship. Are you guys familiar with those guys? What's interesting, they can sort of do geofencing, right? So say you're at like Bonnaroo or something like that. You just want to geofence everyone at Bonnaroo. You do that. So I met someone in the entertainment industry. I said, books Axe. I was like, why don't you do this? And the response was that it's a cool idea, right? But marketing hasn't advanced so much. So there could be an absence of strategy around marketing for mobile. And then apps, do you need them? Right? And what does the app do? Is an app just a replication of the store? It's not. It could be. The technology is nascent. There are very few players in the space. A lot of people are just marking up with Google Analytics. It's not immediately easy to tie back to business value. There are different concepts around sessionization, and there aren't like vocabulary and like measurements across mobile and site. And so it's hard to integrate the data in meaningful ways. That's why a few years ago, this was, and I think still is, a pretty interesting question. What is the duplicated site and mobile audience? If you're like an e-tailer, right? How many people do you have across both devices, right? And how does that impact your business? A company like Rulala, which I know Josh used to work at for 7 years, does a significant amount of 9 figures of revenue on their mobile business from nothing a few years ago. eBay, I haven't checked the data, but they were on track to do $4 or $5 billion on just mobile in a couple years. And if you look, the site is not, the mobile app is not a duplication, right? It has a different strategy. So what do you do about mobile? It is not that different to measure, right? There are KPIs, there's brand awareness through mobile, and you simply need a clearly articulated strategy. And you need to put things within the context of a value chain to support tracking of mobile across apps and sites. Trend 2, I want to talk about is omni-channel. This is a slide from Google, and I'll let you guys check it out. And essentially, what it's showing is that people do a lot of stuff before they go into store on their mobile device and on their laptop. Research. Sometimes they do repeated trips. They talk to people. So there's a blurring of our shopping experiences. And this is what kind of omni-channel analytics is attempting to address. It's this idea that there needs to be seamless experiences through the brand, and you need to focus on omni-channel around the customer. And the key is the customer, and how can one identify the customer as it moves across paid, owned, and earned media. This is a slide from Forrester. I'll let you guys take a look at this. Essentially, when I create a marketing analysis, it starts with paid, owned, and earned media, and you drill into that, right? Oftentimes, it would be referred to as multi-channel. The last couple of years, I started to look at this idea of basing around like cohorts, right, and psychographic segments, and customers, and what customers do in their behaviors within the context of kind of inverting this matrix. And that's what omni-channel is. There's so many data sources to consider when you're bringing together data. There's internal data in your data warehouse. There's the traditional digital analytics data across site, mobile, social. There's syndicated data that you can get about attitudes and propensities, and likelihood to purchase. There's audience data, financial data, B2B data. There's a lot of data, TV and telecom data, and cable data. And by bringing together all of these data sources, you start to create big data. Not every retailer has big data. Not many companies actually have big data. But where it starts to get interesting is when you say, well, I have data, and it is maybe a little digital, a little internal, a little social, and I can start stitching it together and elaborating on frameworks to be able to measure customers as they move across against a business goal. So what then is omni-channel? You move from single, multiple, cross-channels to omni-channels. So when you actually go into a store in the future, a Staples, for example, it could recognize you once you connect to Wi-Fi on your mobile device, respond to you as you walk near a kiosk, print out a coupon for you as you walk by, right? If they're actually tagging at the aisle level in items, could actually track what you've picked up or what sections you've gone to, personalize a circular to send to you in direct mail, or if you've decided to buy something, you have a loyalty card, fulfill or send an offer through email. So omnichannel is making all of this consistent, concentrated on brand and your customer. In analytics, the omnichannel work that the teams I've worked on have done, data mining across these sources, segmentation, churn and attrition, satisfaction, LTV, and traditional measures of recency and frequency. There's been some challenges I've run into. There's an unavailability of customer level data, right? So you start to have to infer and prorate if you can do so. It's expensive, right? These sources of proprietary data, especially around audience, are very expensive. Speaking to the 60% of CMOs who are having trouble hiring resources, there's not a lot of experience applying models. And when you can find those talents, they aren't inexpensive. And there's oftentimes little commitment from IT, hence the need for software as a service, right? Companies like Rama's or companies like Bill's. And there's a lot of privacy concerns around this, you know, and I talk with friends or with family or with folks who are interested in this, you know, they get very freaked out when I start talking about stitching together this stuff. You know, it's almost like NSA work, but it's fairly anonymous and isn't personally identifiable. And I want to talk a little about, if you're doing stuff later, about how that you can prevent that with some technology. So here's attribution. This in omni-channel is, and just in general is key. Like, how do you actually attribute a transaction to a source? So there's a lot of ways to do it. The most traditional way is last click. How many people here know what last click is? Cool. So last click, I think I built a couple builds towards the end, is something like this, right? 100% of the credit for the sale is assigned to last click. Somebody typed in data zoo, right? And then sent a lead form and they figured it out. First click would be maybe you met, it was the first click. It was an advertisement one clicked on from a conference website. But attribution gets a little tricky, right? What if I meet Bill here and then I decide to buy, right? So attribution comes offline as well. Linear, each step is valued equally. Time decay and position-based. These are specifically relevant to paid search. There's equal weighted. There's so many different types of attribution that are enabled through some innovative models that are patented to some degree and are also available in the public domain that I'd encourage anyone interested in innovating in the analytics space that attribution is a pretty ripe area to do it. And there aren't that many companies doing it, like Visual IQ, Marin Software, Kenshu, a few others. And then a lot of analytics companies that do it on cookie-based data. Optimization and testing, I talked a bit about this before. Talked about A/B testing, where you take you have a control, two variations, and you kind of test them, right? Oftentimes, in the real world, people don't have controls. They just kind of roll out. They figure out which one does the best. But traditionally, you'd want to use a control. Multivariate testing is a little bit different, right? You're actually changing either every possible combination called full factorial or not every possible combination, right? Partial factorial. For example, you wouldn't want to show white buttons on white backgrounds, things like that. And what one can do is, given a goal or multiple goals, engagement, revenue, conversion, you can determine which combination of elements of site experience yield the best lift to your goal. If that's finance, which one gives you the best average order value? If that's conversion, which one gives you the highest conversion rate? And what you'll find out is that all of these techniques give you different answers on which one is actually ultimately going to be the best decision. So, you know, I've tended to bias towards doing simple A/B tests before complex multivariate tests. But again, if you have a high traffic site and you have the capability to do multivariate testing, you can learn some interesting things, especially when you start to segment the results of tests based on psychographics or propensities. Optimization, this is like this word that means nothing. And I said, well, what types of optimization are there that one could do? So site optimization is really like functions, features, flows. You're doing A/B tests. You're running, oftentimes a tool like Optimizely, right, or Monetate to do things like site or landing page optimization. They're often glummed together with conversion optimization, right? But they are different. A landing page might be which one clicks off the landing page, which one converts better. There's different goals. Mobile optimization is, it's simply testing on mobile. Inbound and outbound optimization, right? Testing the various campaigns that you're sending inbound and outbound. And ad, search, and in-store shopper optimization. Getting into trend 4, personalization and targeting. Rama's going to, I hope, talk a bit about this in his panel. But essentially, what targeting is you can target based on any number of attributes. We talked about behavioral and contextual a little earlier. Personalization takes that to the next level, right? You have different data sources. You build custom segments. You start to figure out which different targeted messages and offer, and then you personalize those to the individual, send them out. And the idea is that you will actually get an incremental return that's greater than the return you would get if you just segmented a list, because you have a full one-to-one personalization. It's possible. Rama's company does it. Certona recently released actually was issued a patent to do this, and it's a very interesting read if you're into that sort of thing. And then there's this analytics and research. This is something a few years ago I was working with a large beverage retailer, and they wanted to enhance their market research about their beverages with analytics. And so they gave me some data, and I did some work with them. And it was around the time where there's this mantra that came out that qualitative data can tell you why, and quantitative data can tell you what, and never the two shall meet, so never ask me why. I'm an analyst. And I think that's a little naive because, you have to, it's an oversimplification. One can ascertain why in quantitative data, but only with quantitative numbers, right? These things moved. Then there's behavioral data. It's very effective in guiding site operations, and it's often expressed in quantitatively. And there are things that each can't solve. For example, how do you best respond to somebody on social media, or what social media campaigns do you roll out? So I thought, could I give you guys a way to actually do this that you could take home with you? There's a way to combine analytics and social research. First, you create a control group of visitors who have viewed small or similar amounts of content. You compare, in this case, site satisfaction to those who didn't use the social feedback and components, and you determine with a high degree of confidence the real impact on satisfaction. When you start to control, assuming you've joined various data sets on demos or attitudes or intent, you can start to understand what the behavior combined with a response around satisfaction indicates in insights. So for example, you might want to do something like a site survey. Did you complete your task? Were you satisfied? Why not? What could you do better? And what you do is you cookie that person, hopefully before they see the survey in that visit, and then you send the VOC data and analytics tools and do your segmentation, or behavioral to the VOCs, and there's a lot of companies that will take this and do the types of work that I'm describing, or you can do both in SaaS or warehouse. You can start to do your analytics. Another thing is privacy and security. I've been called on a few times to help define some rules around them, and I've basically just identified them here. So marketing needs a seat at the table. So in privacy and compliance forums and in task forces and teams, one needs a seat in marketing at the table because of the enormous amounts of customer data, both internal and external, that are being collected and mined that are relevant to the business. I think it's important for companies to be transparent about the data they collect, so privacy policies, I guess 3P is pretty dead now, but the idea of just publishing on a site or publishing upon request, right, a list of the technologies that you're tracking and how you're measuring, helps to kind of prevent the spook factor. It's important. I was going to talk about data governance, but it's maybe a little bit drier than analytics. So there's a need to create formalized governance around analytics, and that includes its impact on privacy and security, whether that's splitting databases up, restricting access. I'm a big fan of cutting off everybody's access to the databases and not giving them the ability to query anything. and then seeing who really needs access, and that's one way of governance. Enable easy and logical opt-out. I mean, it's a no-brainer these days, but I've been trying to opt out of a lot of emails, and it's so interesting how complicated it can be. 1, 2, 3 click. Eliminate all unnecessary data collection, have a data retention policy. Years ago, it's a friend of mine in here I used to work with. I was like, we'll just collect it all up in a big data warehouse. You've read the book twice. And I don't advocate for that anymore, right? Just don't collect it. Stop collecting it. Delete it on a retention policy. And don't do weird things like EverCookie and just spooky flash shared objects and other ways that you can circumvent the user's perception of privacy or their choice. It's just a dumb thing to do. And I was gonna, I didn't know if you guys would be technical at all, and I figured maybe, maybe not, but it's really interesting. I think one of the things we're gonna come out of in the United States is this idea that in big data environments, secure function evaluation, which is a cryptography method for not only encrypting data, but actually performing functions on top of that encrypted data so that the data set is never seen and the people that have the right key to see the answer could see the answer. It's a pretty interesting way to go. And so I don't know if SFE is going to impact marketing in the near term, but I think as people start to consider the implications on privacy and security and big data and these unified architectures, that this may be a way that we're moving. And I wanted to do a few quick case studies before we go. This is something with Toyota, right? And what they did is they advertised on Facebook. They have a page. And they had an embedded frame, right, that they served off their own web servers onto Facebook. And it was like the gold rush. They were just impressed that they could do that, right? Simply embedding, like, microsite, specific to that look and feel. They got people talking about it, right? Something as simple as that. And you can track that. And I want to talk about sort of an omni-channel social example of something I did a while ago. Sponsored out on Facebook for like motorcycles. I don't ride, but I have respect. So I was doing some work, and it's targeted at fans. They targeted by geographies, gender, and age constraints. People clicked on it, and they went to their fan page. And again, like Toyota, they were excited because this was embedded and was a commerce feature on Facebook enabled through them. Click through it, it linked to their microsite, right? So now you're on Toyota's motorcycles domain, excuse me. Or, interestingly, if you had the app installed, right, it would open the app for you. Or the site where somebody can transact. Dead. The P's I talked about, talk about the analytics value chain. Things like the unified customer analytics lifecycle and putting your metrics into a lifecycle that's quantifiable financially. You need to build in staff analytics organizations, centralized, maybe not ad hoc, right, and sort of just spread out through the corporation, but centralized. You need to stay current with what's possible to impact with analytics and how. A lot of these themes I brought up are what startups are investing in, what they're creating, and what some larger retailers are staffing for. So these are things that if you want to have a job in analytics, you have to get a viewpoint on and figure out how you can either manage them or execute on them. And I think a big deal is just tying it all back to economic value, profitable revenue or reduction of costs. Like that rings true to a CEO, right? It's what it's about. Everything else is overhead. So, focus on that. And that's all I have for you. Just an expose. These are my 2 books on Financial Times Press, Pearson imprints. One is more of a quick education on the ins and outs of digital analytics. And then the next one is, interestingly, a book about building analytics organizations with a lot about these concepts and more. And the foreword for the blue one was written by Tom Davenport, so if you like his stuff, he advocates for it. You should go buy it. All right, that's all I have to say. Thanks for having me. I can answer any questions that you have. I'm a Sagittarius. Any questions? I'll just talk. I'll do like Randy Moss. I'll ask myself questions.
So interested in Judah's experience, what he's done at organizations or consulting for organizations to help relieve the analysis paralysis. I don't think it's so much a big data problem. I think it's we just have a lot of it, we have too much of it, and we don't know where to focus our attention to get the answers the business needs for the stage that the business is in.
Yeah. And I was starting to say, well, I had framed this idea of the analytics value chain, this concept above actual doing work to kind of give people context for how to solve for that, right? Is it begins with business requirements and business questions. You know, I've read recently somebody said like 20% of analyst time should be spent doing whatever they want to do. It's like they'll be surfing the web, drinking coffee. I don't know if that's really maybe the best for all organizations. So, you know, by firmly rooting all the work around business questions and requirements within a roadmap, right, and documenting that stuff, pre-engagement, having processes documented, you have like, you know, when I work, I have an analytics roadmap, here's what we're going to do. Well, can you do this? Well, we can, but we're going to have to move these things. You know, it's how you start to say no, and that's another thing, right? You have to say no, and saying no is an art, right? You can't just say no, it's a stupid idea. You have to be like, it's a great idea, but we can't do it now because we're doing this. Do you think it's more important than this or that? And you then go through the process. So I think that's one of the, and two of the ways that you can do that. Any other questions? All right, we have a gentleman over here. I'm going to do my Phil Donahue. Sally Jesse Raphael. I'm giving my age here.
Great. So it seems, and you had a slide there about framing the right business questions, which should almost have been at the very start. What are the different or new skills that people need to be better framers of the right business questions to keep up with the capabilities of the analytics and the tools that are there to address the questions if asked properly?
Okay, that's a good question. So we all heard that. It's interesting. So to me, I think it's about business. Let's assume that, you know, even in a nonprofit context, there's still an impetus to, you know, maintain the solvency of the business, right? So the idea is quite simply tying back to what are those things that create business value. And I know that sounds so simple, but essentially what is it? Like, why does a site exist? To sell something, to enable the consumption of information, to serve as a vehicle for generating leads. And so all the analytics work should ideally tie back to that. And, you know, oftentimes one may want to, you know, make estimates or create proxy values. So, for example, in a digital context, when looking at like paid, owned, and earned media, there are transitional events in a web experience or in a digital experience that you can sort of say are worth this, right? It's kind of like scoring, right? But you're just financially quantifying it. And you can sum it or do all sorts of mathematical operations on the value of those events to create a tie back to revenue that can help to inform, right, whether the types of work, you know, that you take for business questions and requirements are actually worth doing as well. All right, any other questions? I'm in the audience. All right. Did you guys hear me back here? Yeah. All right, all right.
To take it from the other direction, if you feel like you can frame the business questions and you're smart enough to have the conversation, but if you're like me and you haven't grown up through this necessarily an analytics-driven environment and you don't have all the technical tools, how deep would you say one has to go back and get into various tools for data mining and whatever else have you to be viable moving forward?
That's a good question. So like, for me, it's why I'm a big fan of centralized analytics teams, because essentially they're consultative organizations that take requests from stakeholders and do analysis projects to create value. So, you know, ultimately, I don't know what you do for work. Can you share or?
Yeah, I mean, a brand planner, brand strategist, been in the agency and on the client side. I've got enough I've got enough quantitative chops to do market research and look at quantitative studies, but you know, increasingly I'm looking at jobs where there's an expectation of data mining skills, SQL, stuff like that, which may be commonplace in this audience, but is not among my skill set, at least not yet.
Yeah, so that SQL is a great place to start beyond select statements and things like that. So that's a great place to start. But I'm also an advocate of these centralized teams creating self-service environments that don't require people to have to reorient themselves beyond maybe their comfort level, right? So there are things like, I hate naming vendors because I don't get paid by any of these vendors to name them, but I'm going to name Tableau, right? I'm a big fan of Tableau. Anybody here familiar with Tableau? It does some cool stuff, right? And you can do it pretty quickly. And you can deploy a dashboard, I think in their most recent version, with a limited, predictive capability that somebody could, filter and toggle and use sliders and drill down and cross dimensions. And it's the same type of operation you would do with SQL, right? You're just doing it in a more visual environment. And there's other ways where I'm also a big fan of like canonical queries. So like we have a customer, what is that, right? What is a customer? And then, data governance would then solidify what that definition is. And then when you have a canonical query, so you have an absence of the ability for whatever reason to provide that self-service environment, you could simply lock a data model and a query down and give access to that query and run it through like Azure or Hue or some like query saving, web-based tool against Hive or Hadoop or something. So SQL and self-service environments. And I think that given that, was it McKinsey? Like a 1.5 million more jobs that need numeric or quantitative managers. It's a huge amount. Something like 400,000 or 500,000 more jobs for people actually doing analytics. It can't hurt to learn these things, especially as programs in universities, start to teach these as fundamental skills. Like a few years ago, you couldn't learn analytics as a pure discipline. Right? You can go to a lot of schools now, especially in the Boston area, Babson Bentley, right? Have actual master's programs, University of North Carolina, University of Chicago, right?
Not the easiest thing, though, to pick up the skills if you're not in school. And
it's true.
Not doing the work in your work.
That's right. That's right. But there, that being said, there's a lot of tutorials on the web, and so if it's a labor of love, you will learn. For example, I wrote these books. And I did them basically in the morning and at night while I had like full-time job and a lot of other responsibilities. So, if you really want to do it, I think you can make the time. And I'd be happy to sort of, if you want to exchange information, give you some of the, just some direction into some areas that I think could be helpful for like the business user. It's also like the MOOCs and a lot of stuff on like Khan Institute and Coursera. You can take and self-train. Right, Market Motive has something. University of British Columbia has something. University of California at Irvine has a course or a certificate. But the benefit of those like MOOCs and online, courses is that they can be somewhat informal. Right, you can fit them to your schedule. Some of them are a little bit more rigorous and have deadlines and demands. None of them are easy, but they do present an opportunity that like when I was of college age, like did not exist. Right, or like on Nextel phones or Motorola is. Anyway. So I hope that was helpful. All right. Any other questions from you guys in the back? They just want the pizza first. That's why. I don't know all the fingers on it. All right. We've got a question up over here. All right. Hi.
Hi. You mentioned the customer life cycle, different stages, and acquisition through retention and so on. Could you talk about lifetime value in that context? Like there is some discussion about that, like historical versus future, and how much important that is, in sort of strategic decision making.
Yeah, so like lifetime value is really an interesting concept. Are you guys familiar with like lifetime value? It's like take all your customers ever and all your revenue and divide it. You get something like that. Lifetime value is essentially what it is, like customer lifetime value. But there's a lot of challenges to measuring it, right? Because businesses may not have collected data going all the way back. It gets political. It's most helpful. So I think it's very helpful. It's helpful for understanding loyalty and retention, and certainly for segmentation by lifetime value is key. It's extremely helpful when taken into context of the cost of customer acquisition, right? And so if you start to figure that type of stuff out, and this is what really gets me interested in analytics on the financial level, is it costs this much to acquire in general or through a particular channel, and over the lifetime value, the customer will have this value. That can start to help inform media planning, the way the way you deploy your brand, the way you design your products. I mean, it's pretty interesting. So I think it's important. Something that in omni-channel is probably a core metric, right? Because it's about the customer. It's not about the channel value. So growing in importance and extremely helpful when taken into the context of the cost of customer acquisition. That's like the stuff I would talk to the executive suite about. Any other questions? All right, that's it. Well, thank you for having me. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. You guys were thank you.